What's going on, people? Welcome to another episode of the Natty News Daily podcast. Just quickly want to mention Dan is not on the podcast because he sliced his finger open. I can only assume cutting fruit.
Had to
Um,
be.
he had to be cutting fruit. So, Dan, I know you're listening to this like probably 2 weeks later. I know you're probably okay by now, but we wish that you're okay. So,
Yeah.
anyways, let's get into this. We've got a very special guest, Miss Nancy Andrews, back on the podcast. Nancy,
Yeah.
welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Leroy and James.
I
Yep.
know 99.9% of people are going to know who you are, but for the 1%, 0.1% that don't, quick short form, who are you?
Okay.
Your position in bodybuilding for the last decades, right?
Yes.
You've been in this game a long time. So
Yes. Three
quick.
decades, believe it or not. So I started obviously like most people as a competitor. I competed in a lot of different federations when I first started, which was really cool because I got exposed to a lot of different promoters, different organizations, and as somebody at the time there was not internet, so you guys can't even imagine this. There wasn't as much information out there, so the way that I learned was by going and competing, and I competed a lot, like in a period of a couple of years, maybe 20 something shows.
That's like
um,
unheard of now.
yeah, it
Yeah.
was like someone at my gym and be like, "Oh, there's a show in Boston next weekend." I'm like, "Oh, what do I have to do?" "Oh, call this gym and tell them you want to come." So you get on the phone and you call the guy and be like, "Hey, I
I
want to come
love
compete in
that.
your show." And they're like,
That's
"All right, we'll
so
see you there."
that's so wholesome. I love
I
that
was gonna
so
say
much.
wholesome. Yeah, it's like refreshing to
Right.
hear that. Like so
Yeah,
Yeah, it
yeah.
friendly
was
and
it was a lot
happy.
different, but through my travels, I met a lot of people, and I think because, then people didn't have their own coach or their own team, it was kind of just a lot of people that loved bodybuilding. Any whether it's natural, tested, not tested, no one really cared. You just went and you competed and see how you do and learn some stuff and meet some new people. And so I did that, for a few years. And in 97, well, my first big title, which I think was a big title for me anyway, when I look back on it, because of the number of people, was the AMBC national championships. And I won that in 1995, and that organization actually became the OCB.
Oh,
So
cool.
most of the promoters that, and I promoted for them too. Most of the promoters that were promoting there moved on to OCB when Matt Shepley started the OCB. Some people went in different directions. I went in a different direction because I had won the worlds in 97, and the WNBF worlds, and they required that it was a little different then. They had their magazine and they had some restrictions, and so because I had won, I fell under the rules and the restrictions, which meant that I had to promote under the WNBF, which was fine. I was okay with it, and I just move on and do that, and I did
Yep.
that for the last until this year was my last year. In 2013, the magazine was going under. The owner of the magazine was not willing to host the Worlds because of the amount of prize money. And at the time, I had my Monster Mass show and a Northeast Classic show in Massachusetts, and those were the two biggest shows in the organization. So the person running it, who is Charlie Carollo, came to me and said, "Hey, is there any way you will do the Worlds? Like, we can't come up with any of the money. You got to pay for it yourself." So
Wow.
I did it.
No
I had been
pressure.
promoting. I know I had been promoting a long time, and we gave bigger prizes back then, which is weird. There weren't as many classes, but we did give bigger prizes per person. So I figured it out, and I knew I was, no matter what I did, I knew I was going to lose money. But the show was so important to me that I was like, this has to happen. Like, so many people, that is what they're gunning for, that I'm not going to let it under over a little money. I'm not going to let it go. I'm going to do this, and we'll
Yep.
figure it out for the next year. And so with that, I did it. And then the opportunity, I had asked Bob and Tina to come as judges because I knew them. They were actually not promoting with us. They had already left the WNBF and gone with the IFPA and the NAMBF, which was a Midwest organization. So I asked him to judge, and the opportunity came up. And at the time, you guys can probably relate to this. My son was 3 and my daughter was 5. And I also have a full-time job with my family business. So I knew there was no way that I can take this whole thing on.
Yeah.
At the time, we had 8 affiliates and probably 30 promoters in the US. There was a lot more. So I
Wow.
was like, this is too much. So I asked Bob and Tina if they wanted to get involved. They got involved and we bought the organization in 2014. And this last Worlds was my last show. So I
Mhm.
won't be promoting, but I'll still always be involved in the sport. That's for
Yeah.
sure.
That's
Yeah.
awesome.
Well, one thing I picked up on that, I think the term that I like to use in that situation is like reluctant entrepreneurship, right? Which I
Mm-hmm.
think is, again, refreshing to hear, right? You were
Yeah.
given an opportunity. You knew maybe I'm going to take a loss on this, or definitely I'm going to take a loss on this, but this is something the sport needs. This is something for the athletes. And you did
Yep.
it like it wasn't for the financial gain. It wasn't for the like
No.
fame. It wasn't for the title. You did it because the sport needed it. And
Yeah.
I obviously I'll like get off my soapbox, but I wish more of that was in the sport right now, honestly, because I
Yeah,
think
no,
we're
now
seeing the
it
opposite.
definitely has changed a lot. It's like, what can you do for me?
Mhm.
That's kind of the attitude where before people were very gracious and very thankful that it happened. The men's world, Siobhan Cunningham, that was his first world's win. He battled it out with Brian Whitaker, very, very close. It was a 3-4 split.
Really, really
It was a
quickly.
great,
Yeah,
uh,
I just want to pick your brain for 2 seconds on how good those two were.
sure.
I just,
How good?
as a fan of those two, I just
Yeah.
want to pick your brain really quick. Like, how good were they?
So both of them were at their peak at that point. So, if you looked at them when they first became pros, like Whitaker, I think had already won his class at maybe 3 or 4 worlds. He
Yeah,
couldn't win the overall. So it really didn't matter to him because he's like, if I can't win the overall, I'm not really the champion. And that's how he looked at it. And
that's epic.
he took it very, I mean, they definitely both went through a lot to get to that point. And I don't, today, I don't see, just based on what I have seen, there's a handful of people that maybe have the ability to grind it out like they did, where they were really good. Like a lot of people with Whitaker's stats at that point would not have continued trying to win. They would have been like, well, I won my class, 3 times, 4 times, whatever.
Yeah,
But he and Siobhan both were professionals. I mean, they got better with their posing. They sought out people to help them to make their condition better. I think they trained, I mean, both of them, the amount of muscle they carried for their frame was crazy. Like
yeah.
their diets were right on. Like they weren't losing muscle when they dieted. They were big and really did very, very well. And, they battled it for a while, but Siobhan always had a tougher time in his, well, both of them had great people in their classes too. If you, as I think back, Whitaker's class was won by Jim Cordova. It was
Yep,
won by Sean Clarita,
yep.
and he won it. So those three were kind of the three that were there all the time.
Jim
The,
was massive. For those listening, if you don't know who Jim Cordova is,
Mhm.
quick little Google search. Maybe I'll
oh,
post him tomorrow on Natty News actually, because
oh yeah,
he's insane.
he is. And you know what? Now if he is like he did a lot of the classic physique poses.
He did, yeah,
If you look back at his poses, you'll see he had the vacuum. He had
yep.
And he was another one that was like studied the sport and he read a lot and he went and he met with people. He was open to learning. I don't know. I think that's probably the biggest difference, that back then maybe they were more open to learning. Like they didn't consider themselves an expert because they won a pro card.
Do you think there was like a
They,
humbleness maybe
yes,
that was
with
lost
both.
or
Yep.
that's lost now?
Yeah. And also just the information. I think some people then, you didn't have as many people claiming to be an expert.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Where now you have so many more, and I think some people are naive. Like they're like, oh yeah, this guy won a pro show and he's an expert or she's an expert. Versus then, people had a lot more credentials if they were considered an expert.
Cool.
So
Cool.
just
Okay.
different time.
Yeah, for sure.
But they
James,
were both really
continue.
awesome. I can send you some pictures. I actually found an old file that had a bunch of their pictures, but they were in it.
If
On
you
the
could send
women's
me
side,
that, that would be
Yes,
amazing.
all of
yeah.
that.
On the women's side, Kathy Vale won the women's bodybuilding, and she won the overall. The figure, Heather Drake won her class, but the overall was actually Najiri McGill, Clarence McGill's wife.
Cool.
She won the figure, and Fit Body was Robin Mays, who now is IFBB pro. So
Big
Crazy.
there was
names.
good competition, really good.
Yeah.
So anyway, it was more that when the decision for me was pretty easy, that you know what, I've done well, and I've done well with this for so long, and I know what worlds meant to me as a competitor. I competed in 8 worlds,
Wow.
and I knew what it meant to me, and I was like, you know what, this, they have to have this opportunity,
Yeah.
and whatever happens moving forward, I'll figure it out.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's something for future Nancy to worry about.
Yeah, right, right.
Present
But you know
present
what?
Nancy is
It
doing
was
this.
really fun. Even it's funny, the restaurant we went to after, everyone from the show went to the same restaurant. I was just there like a couple of weeks ago, and they're like, "Oh, remember that big show you had at Worcester State and all the people were here at midnight?" I'm like, "Yep."
Good times.
Love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so fast forward, right? Like that was the glory days.
Yeah.
That was 2014, right? It's
Yeah.
2025, so over a decade since you became the president of the
Mm-hmm.
WNBF, 30 years in the sport, and then I mean, most everyone's going to know at this point, but like you said, you stepped away. Off
Mm-hmm.
air, you kind of said that you felt like that was the best thing for the sport. I would love to hear what kind of, I'm sure it wasn't a spontaneous decision, right? Like what kind of
No.
led to that decision and why is it that you think that this is some sort of catalyst or will actually help the sport, you being removed from that position?
Yeah. So, you know, a lot of what I did was based on relationships that I had with people, whether it was a trainer, people that went to my show. You can see I'm not very good at social media. I'm not, I don't have all these videos. I don't have all that kind of stuff. So it's not the technology. I don't have a lot of sponsors for my shows. I never have. But I have relationships with a lot of coaches, and I have relationships with people that are involved with my events. And all of those people in that network of people have all contributed, in a big way over the years. But, as time changes, their businesses have changed and my business has changed. And, that was fine. And, wasn't really, I wouldn't say was the problem, or not that there was a problem. It was kind of more of a time thing, where I have a family business that I work in full time, and then I'm doing this. And you'll see when your kids start to get older, they all have demands where they need you certain places. So time was tough for me in terms of managing my kids' schedules, managing my schedules, going to these shows and promoting. Um, but I was lucky because I had good relationships, and that's why I was able to do it probably with a little less time than maybe some other people starting out. But as we started to move forward and things changed, which I would say the biggest changes were right before COVID, things were starting to change a little bit. And the WNBF really needed more attention, not less. It needed more work, and it needed some new blood, I think, which we had a lot of older promoters, that COVID came and they were gone. So during COVID, prior to COVID, I had thought, you know what, I probably should move in another direction, because, the sport and the organization deserves more than what I'm able to give. But COVID came, and then it was like nobody wanted to do anything. And I kind of felt like a renewed, like, I've got to do this. Like, people need this. And I don't know if you guys knew, but I did have a show over COVID in a warehouse building with no audience and a live stream. And we had like 180 people in it.
What?
Yeah, nobody, because there was nothing going on. So I really, and like people were telling me at the time, like I had a Zoom call with all the coaches from here that I know, like, guys, I want to do this. I don't know how it's going to work out.
This is
This
amazing.
town, I found a guy that rented to all of the venues. He rented the lighting and the stage. And I called him and I said, well, where do you keep all your stuff? And he goes, funny you ask. I actually have a full warehouse. You could have an event in it. And I said, really? He said, yeah, we'll live stream it. We'll stay to the state regulation. You can only, they didn't make me count the judges, which was awesome. So they had like a loading dock outside so I could keep like staffing people on the outside. And then they didn't make me count the judges because the distance the judges were away from the
Oh my God.
people,
Sounds
they
like
didn't
when we were
count.
planning our wedding.
Yeah. And then we had the 25 competitors. So I broke the whole show into 25. So you only competed with the same, like if they were crossovers, they all had to be together in the same groupings. But I managed to get it all together. We gave away pro cards.
That's
It was
incredible.
pretty awesome. And I know it gave a lot of people hope. And so that I was kind of like, well, you know what? When the sport needed it, I was there and I stepped up and did what I
Yeah.
think was the right thing to do because I didn't want to see people, get so discouraged that they're like, I don't even want to do this anymore. I, had enough.
Yep.
Mhm.
So that was good. But when the Worlds went to Seattle, I likely would. There was not a discussion with me about that. I got an email that no, I actually didn't even get that. I think I saw it posted that Worlds was in Seattle, and I have always said Worlds should be in Seattle, but it really was supposed to be on the East Coast. So had it been on the East Coast, I probably would have been gone last year.
Right.
So part of the deal with me leaving was that the Worlds could be in Boston because I wanted that to be the last one. And Bob and Tina and I promoted the Worlds in 2014 in Boston. So 13 I did in Worcester, which is where I live, and then 14 we did Boston. So yeah, so that's how that worked out. And so I mean, I knew at least a year in advance. They knew that I was going, and I knew I was going.
Hmm.
Their kids, Bob and Tina's kids, Tyra and Bobby, are college students, but they've grown up around the sport. They want to be that, Tina and Bob had expressed to me that they wanted to be involved in the business. So with that, I gifted my shares to Bob and Tina's kids.
Right.
So I
Okay.
basically gave it to their kids because I'm in a family business and I know what it's like and the sacrifices that those kids have had to make over the years.
Hmm.
So I felt like I've gotten enough from the business. I've gotten enough from being part of this. I've lots of friends, the more important things to me are the friends and the fun
Yeah,
than the money.
for sure.
Mhm.
So with that, their kids were interested in the business, and it wouldn't be right for me to stay in and have their whole family working in the business, and then I'm half owner of the business that they are splitting between the four of them. So
Mhm.
I kind of made that decision that that's what I was going to do. And then with my own shows, they asked me if I would stay on as a promoter, which no, I wasn't going to do that. Because I just want to move in a different direction and have more time. So it didn't make sense. And at the same time, there were people here that were very interested in being promoters that never would do it, or they didn't want to step on my toes, or they didn't want to get, where there was a conflict with me, a personal conflict with me if we were competing against each other for shows in
Mhm.
the area. So, there were different people that approached me about buying my shows. There were some that I right away turned down that, they had nothing to do with my shows. So I was like, no, it's not going to go that way. But I ended up going with Bonnie Lafrac. I had done a big transformation contest with her with my show starting in 2014, and we ran it all the way through. And then 2 years ago, she started doing her own events. But I had basically added my Spring Mania show for her so that we could do her transformation, and it didn't really conflict with the real show because it was kind of like a novice beginner show. So it made perfect sense for her to take that show.
Hmm.
So she is taking the Spring Mania. And then with the Northeast Classic and the Monster Mash, those went to Ryan Sullivan. He has shown nothing but loyalty, and he's really been great to me in terms of helping me out with anything I needed, being there for the sport, being there for other people. So he made the most sense that the people that were most loyal to me and helped me the most with promoting, that's where my shows went. So I
Yep.
kind of feel like I was fair to Bob and Tina, because I'm giving that to their kids, and
Yep.
I'm fair to the people that made me successful, which is Bonnie and Ryan, and they're gonna move forward with that. If I were still involved, I do not see Ryan putting a show in this neck of the woods. I don't see Bonnie going head to head with me. She would have stayed non-sanctioned and just done her thing. So, for both of them, it's a big opportunity. And for Bob and Tina's kids, it's a huge opportunity.
Yeah.
And they have a lot of good ideas and a lot of good stuff. And they're the right age. There needs to be some new blood there. And I really have a lot of faith in what they can do. They're hard workers, they're smart. So I think all in all, I feel good about it. Like I feel like I've been fair to both sides of my business,
Yep.
Hmm.
and fair to the athletes, because the athletes can make their decision now. Obviously Bonnie and Ryan are going with the AMBF. They were not going to go with the IMBF because of relationships. And Bob and Tina will continue on with what they're doing and get promoters that they're comfortable with, that they can work with, because it wouldn't have been a good team with them
Hmm.
all together.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, I mean, it seems like a true passing of the torch, right? Like you saw
Yeah.
opportunities for other people, just like you were given an opportunity when you were kind of in that position. So
Yeah.
it's kind of like a whole full circle moment there for
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. That's a really good point, James. Yep.
Mhm. And, looking forward for you, I've already seen you've put on some seminars already, and we kind of talked
Yeah.
about what your ventures are off air. So,
Hmm.
now that you've stepped away, and I'm going to pick your brain
Yeah.
about this whole thing now that you can kind of like be a little bit more objective, but more on the personal level for now, like what are the next steps for you? Is it truly just taking a breath, being with family, doing some seminars? What do you see for yourself?
What's funny? It's as soon as I stepped away from the WNBF, I got a lot of opportunities from people that are involved with organizations that are not WNBF. So, we you know, I have a lot of options for what I can do. Um, I'm going to be this Saturday taking the OCB judging course, because it's part of the criteria. I'm judging one of their shows, a local show. They had asked me to judge, and I said, "Well, what's required?" And they're like, "Oh, you're okay." And I'm like, "No, no, no. I'm going to do what everyone else who wants to do this is doing. I don't need to be special. I'll do it." And I want to make sure, yeah, obviously I want to do a good job. I want to know, I want to learn more about their criteria, and I want to learn more about the way that they want the judging handled. So I'm going to do that. And that's this Saturday. And I'm
Sweet.
pretty Sean Sullivan, I've been friends with him for years, and he is doing the training. And I always feel like any of those you go to, whether I'm presenting it, someone else is presenting it, someone's helping me, you always learn something.
Mhm.
And it keeps you fresh, and it keeps your eyes open. So I'm excited about that. I'm going to be judging at least one of his shows. Um, there's a couple other shows that have asked me about judging. Not sure how that's going to work, in terms of scheduling. I'm trying to work out a couple that I was supposed to travel to prior to this year, that I never got to them. And a couple of the promoters are like, "Oh, please, can you come?" So I'm trying to
Mhm.
work out that. So I'll be doing a pretty active judging schedule. The seminars, I am going to be doing something with Dr. Joe. We just haven't locked down a date. And we'll bring in some other people too, to that one. I started doing seminars with Dr. Joe in the late 90s. And he was the main writer for natural bodybuilding and fitness. He wrote most of the nutrition articles. He was the first person to not deplete water, that was able to write an article about it and explain
All right
why
on.
we're not.
Cool.
Yeah. And a fun fact for Dr. Joe used to have a show in Evansville, Indiana. And I went out to judge his show, and I can't remember the year. It was sometime around 2000. And one of the competitors, he was either a junior or a teenager, was Lane Norton.
Mm-hmm.
And they had a seminar in between the prejudging and finals, and he was right there in the front asking a million questions. So I wasn't surprised that he went on to be pretty successful in this, because he asked a lot of good questions when he was a kid.
Right on.
Yeah. For
Yeah.
those that aren't aware, like the Dr. Joe that Nancy is referencing is like the original bodybuilding coach, like turned
Yeah.
out to be, Lane's coach and like coach to all the coaches, and is just an
Mm-hmm.
absolute resource of information. So yeah,
Yeah.
if you can find anything on him, read it, listen to it,
Yeah. His
go to the
last name is
seminars for sure.
Klemzeski.
Hmm.
I think if you throw in Evansville and Indiana, there's not too many people there. I went
You'll
there
be able to
once. It
find
was,
him. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah.
I love it. Well, if you ever need a physical therapist for one of those seminars with Dr. Joe, you let me know. Okay. I'll find
Okay.
someone
I
for
think
you.
I'll take you up on that, especially a physical therapist that's a bodybuilder.
There's
Because
not too many of us.
honestly, we always did a lecture with a physical therapist, because everybody who lifts has something. And I don't
Yeah.
know if you knew this, Dr. Joe is actually started as a physical therapist,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
then he got
Yeah.
into the nutrition. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Leroy is secretly nodding. He won't let me fix him. He's got
oh,
too
geez.
many, too many injuries to list right now. He just puts his head through
Oh,
a wall and just deals with it anyway.
oh
Some
boy.
something future me can figure out.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I love it. So, yeah, so some seminars, some judging, things like that. And I love it, right? Because your whole adult life, at the very least, has been committed to the sport. So I couldn't just
Yeah.
imagine that you were just gonna, sail off into the sunset. I knew there had to be
No.
something, and it was
Yeah.
just a time to change the chapter, pretty much, is what it sounds like.
Yeah. Yeah. And I do think, the opportunities that are there are really good for the new people that are taking part, on the WNBF side with Tyra and Bobby going in, and on the other side with the AMBF is Bonnie and Ryan. Um, I I always, a goal of mine always was some consolidation, which I wasn't. I thought we were moving in the right direction. When in 2016, when Matt Shepley had problems with the OCB, and the OCB kind of combined for a little bit, where their pros were competing in the WNBF, but then quickly after a year, he was able to get his back on his feet, and then he went off and did his own. I do always wish that, at the time, that the ownership was the current ownership, because I know I could have worked with them really well, with Marjorie and Sean Sullivan. Chad, I don't know as much, but he seems like, it could be workable, and a lot of their promoters are great. So it's unfortunate for the sport, because that at that point, when those two had come together, it could have been something much bigger in terms of sponsorships and getting the money to the athletes, because the prize money is always tough for promoters to come up with.
Yeah.
And if you have the volume, obviously you can do the prizes, which we have a big WNBF show with the 100 grand,
Yeah,
the
Yeah.
yeah.
UAE.
Big announcement,
Yeah.
WNBF Galaxy.
What
Yeah.
do you think about that? Because that's
Oh,
huge.
I think it's awesome. The Kyle,
Yeah.
the UAE, Kyle Gallant, the president. I talked to him at the Worlds. He's got some great ideas, and he's really dedicated to making this a much bigger thing. Like he really wants all the bells and whistles. He's competing with the IFBB. So he said, that's basically the only other federation in the UAE where he is.
Yeah.
And he's a Canadian,
He is.
Leroy.
He's
He is
a
a
Excellent.
Canadian.
Yep.
Yeah.
There's some about
Yeah.
Canadians just doing shit right, you know?
Yeah. So he is there, and then they have Malaysia, Taiwan. Taiwan's always had huge shows, and like
Their
you look
shows are
at the
crazy.
yeah, they're definitely, in terms of like stage setup, they're competing with the IFBB.
Oh,
They
for
have
sure.
all the bells and whistles. It's funny because everyone here in the United States, when you look at places, especially on the East Coast, everything's old.
Mhm.
So any of that stuff, you're going to get it. You got to bring it in. We don't have those kind of venues where they're,
Right.
but the stages that they set up are amazing. Steph Noble's in there. I'm not sure if
Yep.
it's just a relationship where she's in there. I haven't talked to any of them since they did it, but I'm not surprised because Kyle was doing a pretty big show in the UAE anyway. And now they're collaborating with the five
Mhm.
and they're gonna do that. And I think it's fantastic. The athletes deserve more money than what they're getting for sure.
Yep.
If you think of it this way, if you go back and put in 1997 when I won the worlds, which that was a long time ago, you guys probably weren't even alive.
3 years
Maybe you
old.
were an
Yeah.
infant. The prize money for the women's bodybuilding was 4,000, and the prize money for the men was six. Plus, they gave you a belt, a gold pendant, a glass trophy. I mean, it wasn't just the check; you got all this other stuff. And unfortunately, as time has moved forward, the prize money has not gone up at the same rate as what it was then. So I love that he's really, being very generous with the athletes. It looks like they're going to really make it pretty special. So I
Yeah.
am hoping that they kill it and they do fantastic.
Mhm.
Logistically too, like so many athletes in that area of the world to go to that show versus coming to America, right? Like
Yeah.
you see those like Taiwan shows,
Oh my
UK,
God.
the UAE, like their numbers are crazy.
Yeah.
And you can bet a fraction of them are ever going to be able to get across to worlds, whether it's in East Coast, West Coast, whatever,
Mm,
right? But if it's in where
right.
it's in Malaysia or something like that, right? The Galaxy is.
Yeah. It's
Yes.
in Malaysia. Yep.
Yeah, so you figure for so many, like you're talking hundreds of potential athletes that are going to be able to go that otherwise may never see a stage that big, right? So I think
Yeah.
and like you said with Kyle as the brains behind it and everybody else he
Hmm.
has on his team
Yep.
that is supporting him, I don't doubt it's going to be quite the spectacle.
Right.
Mhm.
The social media he has, the
Yeah.
video, the
Oh, for sure.
photography, everything.
Yeah.
Although I have to give a little shout out to Nick from Better Aesthetic that shoots the worlds. He does a fantastic job. Nick, he really works hard at it. Nick Colville. So he does, but it's a lot. And that's a whole another issue with the media and how are you gonna help these people promote themselves so
Mhm.
that they can get sponsorships? It looks like they have some pretty good sponsors, big sponsors.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, for the sport to be as successful as we know it, like you have to get it to the general population. It can't just be like the inner circle
Mm,
of competitors watching shows. And part of
right.
that is the spectacle of it, right? Like their
Yeah.
show, like UAE does a good job. Taiwan, like I think Taiwan was the one that had like the lightning in the background of their
Oh yeah, it's
stage last time. Like
unbelievable.
They
awesome
had like
stuff.
the sliding doors when like I remember the clip of Dirk walking through like
Hmm.
Yep.
that is exactly what you saw when like Phil Heath walked onto the Olympia stage, you know what I mean?
Exactly.
Yeah, that's what it
Exactly.
has to be for the sport to grow,
Yeah.
right? Now, and you mentioned too, Nancy, like a lot of that, I wouldn't say it's easier, right? Because like doing those kind of things, like I can't imagine the amount of work that goes into it. But
Oh yeah.
abroad, more feasible for whatever reason, right? How, as someone who's based in North America, how do we get that over here, right? You've been on the East Coast for years and years. You've seen things come and go. What
Yeah.
changes do you think need to come about so that we can start elevating like North American bodybuilding to the levels of UK and Taiwan and Asia?
It's something that people don't really want to hear, but consolidation. There's just too much. I mean, it's just so watered down. If you look at areas, how many shows, like look at New Jersey. How many shows are in New Jersey? A lot for not a big state. There's a ton of shows. So
Hmm.
all of these shows are getting a few people and a few good people. I don't know with the people involved right now. I think I think the consolidation happens by people going away, not them joining
Hmm.
together. That some people are just going to fade away. They're not going to be able to keep up with it, because if you look at some of these shows, um, if you go to a show, if your first show you go to, you compete against one person in your class, and the whole show has 25 people in it.
Yeah.
I don't know. That just wouldn't feel like, I don't know what would I mean, I'm sure if you want to get better personally, you'd say, all right, I'm going to try this again. But because those kind of events are still allowed to exist, it waters everything down and it kind of ruins it for the bigger picture. So I would love to see some of these people go away, basically, and have some consolidation where there were bigger events. If like in the WNBF, if there's all these pro shows, like I had two pro shows in Massachusetts. Fulton had a pro show in Connecticut. There were two pro shows in New York City. I mean, in that little area, it's 3 hours. The farthest away we're going to be is 3 hour drive. It's not far.
Yeah.
So, do we have enough pros in that region to really support that? Probably not.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So you can't, and I know a lot of people will get a pro card and then they're like, well, I want to do a pro show in my state. And it's just, you can't please everyone. So if we could kind of all move away from that and look at like the bigger picture of, let's have, we have, I don't know, certain number of women bodybuilders, which is not a lot because a lot of shows don't have. But let's just say, hypothetically, you have 50 active women bodybuilder pros. You don't need 10 shows a year for them,
Right.
because none of them are going to be good.
Yeah.
Right. So I think if you look at the other in Europe, they've kind of planned a little bit better, so that the only class that seems to have a lot is the men's bodybuilding, but they travel a lot of,
Mhm.
and for whatever reason, they're more willing to travel than people in the United States. People in the United States have gotten used to like having everything on their terms, I think. And they're not going to travel as much. They're going to just go to the home to market show, the
Mhm.
the closer show.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's like almost part of culture now though, right? Like everything gets to your
Yeah.
doorstep with Amazon, like the
Mm-hmm.
microwave generation where it's everything's instant, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
for the young athletes that have that any given weekend there's a show, it's like, well, why would I even bother traveling, right? It's going to be
Mm-hmm.
expensive and time and this and that. And on the other side, like, we were talking for me for my season, like I'm trying to figure out what show I can do that's going to actually have a good number of people in it. I'll
Right.
travel. I just want to know that there's going to be a turnout, but that's kind of the situation we're in, right? Where you kind of said like in a given region, if there's 6, 7 pro shows, the odds of an 8, 9, 10 man lineup, they start to shrink, right? So
Right.
if you have 100 bodybuilders, for example, let's say it's double the women's bodybuilding. You have 100 pro bodybuilders across the country, but you've got 30 pro shows that
Yes.
that athletes could just a 1 or 2 hour drive versus 3 shows that everybody flies to, but you're going
Right.
to get a good turnout. You're going to have better
Yeah.
experience for the athletes, more money, ideally a better presentation of the show. But we don't see that yet, right? So
Yeah.
you kind of get in the situation I'm in where I'm actively asking like, what's the turnout going to be like? Because if I'm going to travel, which I
Mm-hmm.
will, but I just want to know it's worthwhile.
Yeah. I think where you're going is worthwhile, or the fall one. Well, the fall one, they changed the date. They moved it later, so I don't know how that's going to work. But
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it's tricky.
usually that the universe usually has decent men, but
Hmm.
that's in I when I had it, it was September, because that was an organization show. So we owned together the Hercules and the Natural Mania. And so with me leaving, they're running both. So they moved the Natural Mania to November.
Yeah.
So I don't know how that would affect that. When it was in September, it had a good turnout for men.
That was my original plan,
Yeah.
was because I went, well, James, when did we go down? When Berto won it? 2 years ago
Yep.
now?
Yeah.
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 23.
23. Yeah.
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 Yeah, so I think that the consolidation and better planning, and it's not just the WNBF, it's if you look at some of the other organizations, if everyone's throwing all these shows and you have these little pro events, you throw a pro event to get a few more people and you a little extra money that you're giving them. Maybe if there was any way that they could kind of come together and come up with a better plan because there's just the numbers aren't there to support all of it. So then the events and the promoters can't really put the money back in to get the bigger event, to get the better venue, to get the, all
Yeah.
the bells and whistles. In terms of just the venues in general, I think especially like Northeast, most buildings are old. So it's really tough unless you're going to bring that kind of stuff in. I know my husband and I are friends with Linda Murray. She was just out here for a seminar, a gym seminar that she does every year at Guaranteed Fitness in Spencer. And it's just a regular gym. It's an awesome gym, tons of equipment, really good gym. But he has her come every year and do this seminar. And she works for Wings of Strength, which is um, the company that runs the Olympia, and they have the rights to the Muscle and Fitness. Um, they bought the rights to that. But for the Wings of Strength, they actually own all of that staging. So, like,
Yeah.
she has a show in Atlanta, they drive it across the country and set it up for her show in Atlanta. Then they bring it back, have their show in Arizona with it. So they're moving it around. And then obviously the Olympia is just another level,
Yeah.
but it's the same group that's doing it. And they've invested in that so that their shows have all of that.
Right. Well, and the other thing to consider with that too is yes, it's a loss for the first couple of years for a promoter or an organization to do that, but it's an investment, and
Yeah.
it's an investment that locks in your standards. Like if you own the lighting, the stage, the
Oh,
backdrops,
yeah.
all that, you know what to expect. It's not, oh,
Right.
we're going with a different company this year and we hope it's going to be good, or
Yeah.
yeah.
No,
I was
right.
actually
I
just
mean,
talking with Brandon Lirio he's with the PNBA. He's a promoter, and his gym did that. His gym built out a stage,
yeah.
built out like 10K lighting rig for that space, and like, yeah, they
Wow.
took a huge hit at first, but
Yeah.
now his expenses to run a show are so minimal because he owns the
Right.
chairs, he owns the tables, he owns the lights, all of
Right.
it.
Right. And he's in Connecticut. So
Hmm.
he's got the same situation that we do here where it's old buildings and it's you either pay to bring that stuff in or like he did. He was smart. He's been in it a while. I don't know what year he is in terms of promoting, but he's been around for at least 5 or 6 years, I
Hmm.
think.
As a
Um,
promoter, yeah, and like as I think he was three-time classic champ for
yeah.
PNBA years
Yep.
back. So yeah, he's been around the sport a bit.
Yeah, yeah, he's been around and but that he was committed to it. And
Hmm.
that speaks a lot for him too, because he committed to doing this and he's wanted certain standards. I think like what you were saying, Leroy and James, is that if we up the standards, the shows here can have that stuff. It's just that has to be the standard, not let's throw up a couple pop-up banners and regular stage lighting. So you can do a lot. I mean, it's just finding the place
Yeah.
and and I think that's where with the event that's going to happen in Malaysia, um, they're going to do some things that we've never seen in natural bodybuilding, and
Yeah.
it's
I
going to
think
be
it's like
pretty
a
interesting.
case of people focusing on the wrong things, right? Like when you see brags about the volume of shows. Oh, we have X amount of shows this year. We have a show in every city, a show on every weekend.
Mm-hmm.
Great, but when we step back and look at the quality of the events, the quality of the athletes, the turnout of the athletes, like those are the things that are actually supporting the sport, not necessarily the
Right.
volume of shows, right? Like if you want the sport to grow, then you need to focus on the metrics that are going to put it in a positive direction, which is typically the reverse of it being less shows, higher
Yep.
turnouts, higher
Yep.
quality, higher
Yep.
production, right? Like I think if you actually ask the athletes that are serious competitors, right, that want to move forward in the sport,
Yeah.
do you want 10 shows a year that are of high quality, of high caliber athlete, of high payout? Or do you want a show every weekend that you could just like drive down on the Friday night, come home on Saturday night, but
Yeah.
you might not get the experience that you want? I think
Yeah.
the unanimous decision is going to be, well, I want the first one, please.
Right. Well,
But
it's maybe after I've stepped away for a while and I've seen it through a different perspective and have a better handle on what else is going on in the world of natural bodybuilding, maybe I can come back and do something like that.
there you go. Well,
That would be
it's the
pretty
whole,
cool.
yeah, it's the Red Sea mentality versus like blue ocean, right? If you've heard of that, like those
Yeah.
decisions are very much based on a federation looking at another federation and saying, I'm competing for the same pool of athletes. I have to put a show to match your show so that I
Yeah.
can have my net as big as possible and collect everybody. For me, where if there was more collaboration, they could collectively say, like, what's best for the sport? And they know that
Yeah.
answer, right? Like
Right.
everyone knows that answer. It's just that's not what the thought is right now. It's what's best for my federation, which
Right.
I get, right? It's a private entity, it's your baby, it's your business. But at the end of the day, like we all started as athletes. And I think like your mindset, Nancy, when you were talking about worlds, like that's the mindset that this current generation needs. Like, how do I help
Yeah.
the sport? What's needed for the
Right.
sport? And then let it and the industry kind of take care of itself.
Yeah. So, I mean, hopefully we over the next few years we do see some consolidation. I think that this event, the WNBF Galaxy, is totally raising the bar.
Mhm.
So everybody's got to look at what they're doing.
Yeah.
And if you don't, you're going to be gone soon
Yeah.
because you're not going to survive because
Once it's
people are going
been
to say,
done, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
once that standard gets raised, right? It's like, if we relate this right to bodybuilding, it's like conditioning, right?
yeah,
Once Brian Whitaker, right, got that lean,
mm-hmm,
it became okay, well, we know it's possible now.
yeah,
And if you don't look like that, then you're out of shape. And
yeah,
we see it now, right? Where like if you don't have dug out, conditioned top to bottom, even at the amateur level now, right? Like we see some of these high
yeah,
level amateur shows, like these guys
yeah,
are incredible, right? And
yeah,
we now hopefully will see that with, this show and some other shows that are like, okay, this is now the bar in which you run a high level natural bodybuilding event. And
yeah,
and people will see that and go like, well, frig, my show doesn't look like that. Like
yeah,
I'm gonna maybe save some money to travel and maybe take a year or two off to
yeah,
improve, save money to travel, and then go to Malaysia or go across to the UAE or go to the UK or whatever the case may be, right? Because
yeah,
now all of a sudden you're looking at it from a different lens of like, oh, like this doesn't have to be what bodybuilding is, right? It doesn't have to be the gymnasium. It doesn't have to be the
no,
two banners on each side and a handshake and a hot dog. Like
yeah,
now the level is being raised, right? And when we see some of the shows the NPC is putting on with their production in the natural stream,
yeah,
right? Like they're pushing the parameters on that side of it too, right? So
right. Well, and
I
now they're trying to go into natural.
yeah,
So that's,
I think
that's
yeah, like you said,
they,
the next couple years will be probably pretty like the juice is getting squeezed, right? Where like you need to
yeah,
step up or you're going to be pushed aside.
exactly. And I think there will be some people that leave the sport that, that just don't have it. They don't have it to really step it up and bring it to the next level. And they've probably kind of run their course as a business. Kind of like I was saying with myself, like, my shows were built on relationships, and do I want to be on Instagram all the time and taking pictures? And absolutely not. No interest in that. I don't, that's
Yep.
just not my thing. But I know that that's what you need to do today. But
Mm-hmm.
there's also other promoters out there that are still doing things like it was 2000. And
Yeah.
Yeah.
those people are vulnerable because what's going to happen is people are not going to just take it. They're going to find another option and they're going to move forward. Also, the in terms of competing or cross competing or competing in multiple federations, um, I do believe that there is less loyalty now. That competitors, and I get it, it's a short-lived career. They want to do what they want to do. And they want opportunities. So it's allowed people to branch out and go to different things. I don't disagree with that. I know some people do. I don't disagree with that because I was a competitor too. I remember when I won the first Worlds, I really wanted to do the MPC fitness with the routine because I did gymnastics. And I asked them, and the WNBF only had restrictions if you won prize money. So you could be a pro with them. If you just competed and you didn't win, they didn't care what you did. You could do whatever. So I had won the Worlds and I really wanted to do the Team Universe. It was right when it first started and it had fitness. Like, oh, I want to do that. Like, that
Oh,
looks
yeah.
like so fun. I'll get my gymnastic friend to make me a routine, blah, 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 whatever. And they were like, absolutely not. Like, you can't do that. So I know how that feels to an athlete, and I would never do that to somebody because I feel like if I do a good job, I can earn loyalty and they'll come back and they'll compete with me. They can have success other places. They can have a different experience that they may enjoy and they should be able to. So I've never had a problem with the crossing, but now that we have also the MPC, I know there's going to be people that are going to say, listen, I want to see how I can do there because
Mhm.
I want to try to get an IFBB pro card. I want to be in the Olympia. I want to be in the Arnold. So,
Yep.
and there
Yep.
have been some good WNBF pros that have gone that route and done quite well. Um, so with this new MPC natural, that's a whole nother thing that I'll be watching, to see how that goes. And
Yep.
we have one in Massachusetts, and it was a guy that has worked at my shows that I've known for 25 years, Jimmy Champy. He's going off and doing the MPC natural show here. And, you know, who knows how he's going to do. But
Yep.
Mhm.
it's
Yep.
another opportunity for people to try and have a different experience. So, it's tough. It's a lot.
Mhm.
But with the ones that have more similar testing, if you can at least get to the point that all of them have the same testing. If we all had the same testing, then at least a competitor would say, well, I'm doing natural. This is what natural means. It means 7 years drug free. It means this drug list. It means just consolidating that would be a
Yeah.
huge step because I think a lot of the people that did go to the MPC prior when there wasn't tested did it because they're like, I don't even want to deal with that. I don't know what they do. I don't know what their criteria is. I don't want to learn it. I just want to compete.
Yeah.
And I think they got a lot of people that way, and that's another one. If the criteria was the same in all natural, if natural could come up with, the same height and weight classes for classic physique, the
Yeah.
same criteria across the board.
Like a code of conduct or something like that.
Exactly. Then there would be some consolidation even there. And then things could get better where you could have that mega show that's, the best of the best, which hopefully there will be that.
Yep. Yeah.
It's what everyone's asking for. Like if you ask an
Yeah.
athlete, and that's where the cross like competition comes from. People want to test themselves. Leroy's done the same thing. That's why you've gone to multiple, when you line up your shows or are thinking of your future, it's like I want to compete against this guy, that guy, this guy. Most athletes could care less about what letters are in front of their pro card, at the end of the day. They want to like
Yeah.
have the experience, they want to have a good experience, and they want to say like I beat so and so or I stood on the same stage as so and so. Like that's all it is at the end of the day. And if the federations would just allow that, and
Yeah.
I know at face value most of them do now, right?
Mm-hmm.
As short as 5 years ago, that wasn't the case. There were two federations that didn't allow that in certain situations. But
Right.
now most of those rules are gone. But again, you gotta dive a little deeper and look at the schedule, right? Come back to the WNBF Galaxy. Love the idea of it. If you look at the date, it's the exact same date as the Natural Olympia. So even if we're allowing athletes to go back and forth between federations, you've now put your biggest show on the same weekend as your competitor's biggest show.
Mm.
And now you're asking dual athletes in the European demographic to pick, which good for business. Is it good for the sport though? Right. And
Yeah.
that's the little things that most people don't even notice. But if we're trying to progress the sport forward, it's like one of those
Yeah.
little things that like doesn't have to happen necessarily. And those small things could make such a huge impact.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah, because there's only so many weekends between uh mid-October and Thanksgiving.
Well, even
Mhm.
the WNBF Calgary, so our pro show up here, moved up to the same weekend as Mr. America. So
Which
then
is
I,
also
Mm,
the same date as UKDFBA, which is different, right? Like different continent, but
yeah.
you can see
yeah,
like there's so much overlap on the schedule
yeah.
now.
So
Does
even,
the Mr. America, you have to be a US citizen?
Mm-mm.
No.
No, just the title implies it, obviously, but
yeah,
no, no.
Yeah.
I mean, Robert Thompson, is with the Caribbean, right? So
Oh,
he's
right,
come
right,
over. He's
right.
brought his team over. Maria, who's the bikini champion, is Italian. So
Yeah,
there is some international athletes that come to it, and I know Mark is trying to
right.
push for more of that. But again, like the title of Mr. America kind of
yeah,
handcuffs him a little bit,
Mm.
yeah.
I I think it used to be you had to be a citizen.
maybe. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. Back in the
Sorry,
good old
I
days.
interrupted you, Leroy. But yeah,
Yeah.
No, I was just gonna say, like with that example for me, like as a coach, because I was gonna take athletes to both. Because Mr. America is anybody amateur, anybody
Yeah.
pro. So I was like, okay, I've got a handful of WNBF and OCB pros. Let's go to Mr.
Yeah.
America, and then in a couple weeks we'll fly out to Calgary, and again, amateur and pro, and let's just go on a little team tour. And then
Right.
the dates got released, and I was like, oh man, like not only does that pigeonhole my athletes now, you got to pick, but now I can't be in two places at once.
Right.
So I was like, like this, again, like
Uh,
James said, like something little, and do we expect everybody to know everybody's schedule? Of course not. But like,
well,
it's
but you
just
could,
you
I
you
could,
wouldn't
could.
say that. I mean, I always was very mindful of schedules because I'm not going to be that person to step on, especially if I'm changing my date. I am not going to step on someone else's toes. It
yeah,
just it's counterproductive. And there are weekends. I know years ago the Yorton Cup used to be later, like end of October, and they moved it back. And I'm sure they moved it back because who has their championship show in September? The OCB, the only one. So even though they have shows throughout the year, by moving it back, they kind of opened it up that
yeah,
theirs is the only big show in September. But everybody else is gunning for the same weekends, October and November. And, it's tough. And with that Columbus Day, the Mr. America thing, if you go way back, the biggest show that weekend there used to be a show called the Gaspari, and it was in Massachusetts. It was an OCB show, and that was bigger at the time, was bigger than the Mr. America, but he still went on that date. So, it's like there's only so many weekends. I can see why he wants that weekend because of the extra travel day, because Columbus Day weekend. He's always on Columbus Day weekend. But yeah, that's another thing, if maybe that can be my new role. I can kind of
yeah.
meet with these people and try to get them to at least be mindful of other people so that they're not stepping on each other.
Just create a spreadsheet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you know
I
what,
mean,
I mean, I know what weekends people have their big shows. And I'm sure they know what weekends people have their big shows. Most organizations don't bounce around too much once you have your schedule. The WNBF probably had the biggest changes this year with me leaving. They shifted their whole schedule around
Yeah,
because they lost a number of pro shows with me gone. But um, and they added more international ones. So now, Spain, Italy, UK, and then now this big UAE and all the Asian ones. There's a lot of pro shows
mhm.
over there. Spain had a
Yeah.
huge one. I don't know if you guys saw the footage of that one.
that was the one Babacar one.
Yeah.
Yeah, Roberto did that one. He does an awesome job. He has great social media.
Hmm.
And so his show will be a qualifier
Right.
Yeah.
because the rules, it looks like the rules are that you need to compete in a pro show or an amateur show to qualify.
Mhm.
Yeah,
So you can't just walk into it.
yeah, yeah,
Which makes sense, right? If you're trying to create
Yeah.
a standard, a higher standard, a premier kind of aspect to the show, you want there to be some sort of filter,
Yeah.
and that's similar to what we saw with like the European Championships when we went to Denmark. Um, it was Denmark, yeah. I didn't think about what country we're in.
Where do we
I'm
go?
very, I'm very sleep deprived. But when we went there, right, that was like the champions of each like affiliate
Oh,
country all coming together. So they had to win or place in a certain level, be invited, go to that
mm-hmm.
show. And it was like everyone that stepped on stage is like, holy crap, like you'd smoke the entire Northeast right now. And it was awesome to see as an
That's
athlete, but
cool.
as a fan as well. You just sat there and were like, holy crap, like everyone's in shape, everyone's big, everyone's
So did
posing
most of those
spot on.
people go on to the worlds or was that like their show?
Talking with some of the athletes and some of the like coaches and even like Daniel who ran it, it seemed like there was a lot of people did European championships, but then they almost had to decide like, do we do worlds over there or do we do the natural Olympia? Because there's just a
Oh,
lot of travel involved.
yeah,
So
right.
Yeah, and
The
they
other
have
pro
like
show,
sorry, go ahead, go ahead.
no, 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 the one other pro show I was just thinking about over there that I didn't mention too is the Swiss. The Swiss is one of the only original groups of people promoting that promoted when I first started.
Oh wow.
The guy Julian Strickler, his dad was involved, and now Julian's running it. And they don't have WNBF Switzerland. They already had their SMBF Switzerland Natural Bodybuilding Federation, but they have a pro show too. So there's a lot over there.
Yeah.
mhm.
Yeah, it almost makes people not feel the need to travel sometimes, right? Like,
Well, we'll see, right? Because
yeah.
there haven't been this many ever. So we'll see what ends up happening. But I don't recall at the last Worlds, there were countries that definitely were not there. Like I don't remember anyone from the UAE. I don't, Taiwan wasn't there.
Yeah.
Um, China was there, but a lot of the Asian countries didn't go. Malaysia was there. He was
Hmm.
there.
Hmm.
Mhm.
He's a
Yeah.
young guy, a good promoter.
That's like what you said, the concern with having these high caliber shows in Europe and Asia and across the world. And then, I mean, we know even just travel within the US is crazy
Yeah.
expensive, but to travel abroad, like we saw it when we were buying tickets, I've studied abroad,
Oh,
like I know how expensive that was to get over there. So it's the
right.
same coming back this way. Like it's crazy. And to win, $3, $4,000 you're going to spend significantly more than that on that trip, right? So it has to be
Exactly.
it has to be worth it for the athletes. And if they can just
Yep.
compete in their backyard and win more money, I would, right?
Right. So with the Denmark show where you guys did your live stream
Hmm.
of it and that's awesome. I'm gonna have to look that one up. It sounds like a good one to watch.
It was a
Yeah, well,
killer show.
You had
it was
fun?
a, it was a long weekend, that's for sure.
Oh, you only went for the weekend?
Oh,
What? Oh,
that
geez, how many days were we there? It didn't seem
Nan
like.
Nancy, that weekend was a blur.
Yeah.
We left on a Thursday and we're up for like 36 hours straight. Then it was a 2 day show, so 2 12-hour days, and then we flew home the Monday.
Oh my God.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
it was rough.
You
they
got to
were
make it
rugged.
into a little bit of like one day at least that you can see the country. Because who knows when unless are you going back this year?
I think we got the invite, but I don't know if logistically if we can, just with Leroy competing, me with a new kiddo, all that
All
fun
right.
stuff.
Yeah,
Life happening.
life.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I get it. But
yeah,
maybe
Yeah.
as you do a few, you can kind of figure out what works for you best.
Yeah.
Maybe you can plan it so you can at least like have a day to look at Denmark.
Yeah. Or breathe.
need at least yeah, need at least a day, a day early to like recalibrate for sure.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, yeah, because we not only like was it like 36 hours of travel, no one slept on the plane because it was incredibly hot. We're jammed in like the seats together.
Oh,
That
But
was
we
terrible.
got off the bus that brought us from the airport and they were already doing like athlete registration. They're like, all right, you're up on interviews. We're like, cool.
oh
Like
my God.
I'm on like 2 hours of sleep. Let's do it.
I don't even know if I can speak right now, much less do interviews.
Yeah, so we did the
Wow.
interviews, then we did like Leroy said, like two 10 to 12 hour days of like live stream the whole time, and then got in a taxi, went back to the airport. Like that was it. It was a whirlwind.
That's crazy.
That was wild. That was
They
good.
had some good, they used to have some good competitors in the WNBF from Denmark.
I think it's the same federation. They just switched over to the PNBA
Oh
when
yeah,
some
yeah, with Lee
ownership took
Kemp.
over.
Yeah,
Hmm.
when Lee left, I think they went
Yeah,
around then.
yeah,
Yep.
yeah. I was impressed with the level of athletes there as well as international that was coming. So I mean,
Oh yeah.
as a whole, the sport is elevating, right? Like Leroy said, the conditioning expectations, the muscularity expectations, the people that were turning pro. Like no discredit to anyone historically, you were the best of your generation. But the people that are
Yeah.
turning pro, even when I first started competing, 15, 16, 17, they wouldn't turn pro now. Like it's a
Yeah.
crazy change in the last couple years. So
Yeah.
like I
It
said,
kind of I think it like peaked, at least with the men's bodybuilding, like 14, 13, 14, 15 was pretty good. And then it did kind of fall off, but that's where there was a lot of new federations coming in and people spreading out. And you didn't see the people that would keep coming back to try to compete and get better. It was
mhm,
where they'd come a year and then you didn't see them again, or it's a little different. Like,
Hmm.
so I'm happy to see it coming back. And
yeah.
we didn't talk about the classic physique. I know you had mentioned about that, and that's going to be interesting. I wanted to try it while I was still promoting, but it was not something that the other half of the WNBF wanted to do at the time. So we just stayed with the bodybuilding, which the times have changed, and I'm glad that they are more open to it now and giving it a shot because
Do
there's a lot of
you
people.
do you think classic has its place, or do you think it's has its place because it's demanded by
Um,
the sport? Or like you know what I'm asking?
yeah,
Like, do you think there's actually
I
a
know
place
what you
for it,
mean.
or do you think that
No,
natural bodybuilding just wants classic physique because of, let's be honest, Chris Bumstead?
yeah, I mean, C-Bum's pulling all these people. Everyone wants to do it because of him. But I think where the natural bodybuilding kind of veered away is that the the presentation, poor presentation became more acceptable.
Yeah,
Is that a good way to put it?
we've chatted about that before. Yeah.
So when presentation maybe counted for more, the people were rewarded. A lot of I can remember like Lee Kemp early on. He was when I had that show in 2013 that I hosted, the Worlds. Charlie Carollo. There were eight affiliates, and Charlie Canada was coming. It was Matt Parks was running Canada, and so we knew he was on board. And then Charlie's like, "You got to get someone from Europe. You better call Lee Kemp and get him over here." And so Lee Kemp was the first person that I talked to outside of North America, and Lee committed to coming and bringing his team. And at that time, a lot of his guys, they were awesome. Their routines were great. They posed like classic physique. Like they were very polished. And in the United States, everyone's like, oh my God, those guys post so well. They're so good. And they were just doing like what normally would be expected like years prior. So I think because the emphasis kind of got away from the presentation, it opened the door for classic physique plus the drugs. So when the NPC started classic physique, and I'm not talking about the IFBB level, but the NPC level, they basically put heights and weights that are natural bodybuilders. So the
Yeah.
heights correlate with the best bodybuilder that's that height, what they could
Sure.
weigh.
Right.
And I don't know where they got their data. They definitely did some good research, but if you took any top natural bodybuilder at the time, like Cleveland Thomas, he went right away when he went over there. When he was in natural bodybuilding, he was huge. He goes to classic physique and he's the right height and weight to make it. He's not making the bodybuilding. So the way that the NPC set that up, they basically stole a ton of the top natural bodybuilders, and just because of the parameters and the opportunities.
Yep. Yep. There's a
So
reason
it's
the five
crazy,
seven
but
isn't 200-pound weight cap.
exactly. I have not seen what I know I don't know if they've come out yet with the parameters for the heights and
I
the
don't think
weights, so
so.
that'll be interesting to see that. And that obviously can change things in terms of how the scoring goes and what's going to win and what's not going to win. But I like that it brings it back to I've always enjoyed watching the more classic posing. So as a spectator and a fan of the sport, I'm happy because I like that. I think it's
Yeah.
really nice to watch.
I'll be interested if they have a couple more poses for mandatories.
Yeah,
When we did like James, Dan, and I, when we were involved with WNBF Ontario here in Canada,
yeah.
we did like the classic category as just like a subcategory in bodybuilding. And
Hmm.
I said to Leo and Charlotte here in Canada, I said, if we're going to do this, we got to do it a bit differently. I want four classic poses along with the
Yeah,
mandatories. So we had like twisting back double. You could do a teacup pose, vacuum of choice, but it differentiated it that much more. And like you said, continued to put an emphasis on posing,
yeah.
because those poses, like you got to hit them right or they're really going to be wrong, right?
Oh yeah,
Like
they look really bad if you don't. Yeah,
yeah,
no,
yeah, like
I
guys can do a front double and kind of mess it up a little bit and it doesn't look too bad. But if you're
yeah.
doing like those twisting poses wrong,
Oh
like
yeah, they look horrible.
you've
Yeah.
screwed up.
Well, I think as I watch people pose, at times I'm like, what are they trying to show me? And I think as an athlete, if you look at a pose that you're doing and you're like, what am I showing them here? There's probably a problem.
Yeah.
So I like what you said about the four additional though, because those are going to be huge separators, and it's going to make it easy to judge because those poses, if you don't hit them right, nothing happens.
I think it creates just that little bit of separation too, because people will
Yeah,
always argue like classic and bodybuilding, but at the highest level,
yeah,
like let's use Bada and
yeah,
Kendall, right?
yeah,
Both top level natural bodybuilders. One is
yeah,
more classic than the other
yeah,
in how he displays himself, along with his physique, right? Like they're two
yeah,
different physiques, but also when you look at how Kendall poses, how Kendall displays himself,
yeah,
How Kendall would hit a twisting back double bicep versus Bada.
yeah,
Now you're narrowing in on what classic physique should be, right?
yeah,
If we look at like a Meshach versus, I don't know, like Siobhan. Like those are two different physiques, right? Like you would look at Siobhan and be like, oh, he's a
right,
bit more classic, where Meshach is five
right,
foot four and 180 pounds. Like you're a
yeah,
bodybuilder. Um,
right,
right. So I think
I
that's where
love,
having
I think the prime example, and this one, the younger population is going to know. Look at Dirk. I love Dirk, right? Great guy, world champion, lights out conditioning. Dirk is the exact like definition of lightweight bodybuilder, but is by no means classic, right?
yep.
Like
no,
just doesn't have the flow, doesn't have the lines, right? And
no,
now, Leroy, you're a lightweight bodybuilder, right? You and Dirk, let's face it, he might take you in bodybuilding, but there's a high chance that you'll take him in classic because the structure is so different, or at least that's the way it should be,
right,
right? So
Yeah.
the argument was always like, oh, it'll just take away from bodybuilding. I think it highlights
no.
certain physiques, really, is what
Yeah,
it
I
does.
agree. I agree. And as weird as it sounds, it could make more people try bodybuilding because when we added Fit Body, the people at first were not for it. Oh, the Fit Body, it's gonna end women's bodybuilding, but it actually didn't because they had to wear the heels. And a lot of women, once they tried the Fit Body and they liked the posing, they would go back and do the bodybuilding. So I think
Yeah.
it's different enough that there's room for both, and I'm excited to see it. I think it's
Yeah.
it's going to be cool, and
I've ac-
definitely,
I've actually had clients where like classic is so popular and they're not big, so they're like, "Oh, I'll just do classic." And I'm like,
yeah,
I think you should do bodybuilding." And they're like, "Well, I'm only 145 pounds." I'm like,
yeah,
but structurally, you just aren't classic.
right,
You can be like a decent, like bodybuilding obviously has its shape.
yeah,
We can definitely see that. You know the silhouette when you see it.
right,
But classic just has there's another asterisk beside silhouette,
yeah,
right? When you think of
yeah,
Arnold, right? When you think of Sebum, there's
yeah. Frank Zane,
there's just that bit more rib cage, that
yeah,
bit less waist, that like when you see classic, you know what you're looking at.
Yeah,
And I've had clients where I'm like, you honestly will probably do better in bantamweight bodybuilding than classic physique up to five
exactly.
six, right?
Yeah, and even I think some of the guys that are in regular physique with the shorts would do better in classic
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
than regular physique.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. For sure.
Yep. The physique's really popular. The men's physique with the shorts is really popular in the foreign countries.
Yeah.
It never really, in my
They're built for
area,
it.
what?
They're built for it.
Yeah. In my area, it never really, most guys that want to compete want to do bodybuilding. They don't want to.
The purist.
Yeah. Well, we had a guy, Oscar Moscat.
Oh man.
He's, yeah, he's
The
from here.
professor. Yeah.
Yeah,
The
he's
professor,
incredible.
yeah. Yeah, he had a
He's
great year. I'm excited for him. I think he's only competed in my shows. And I
Yep.
remember he competed a few years ago and he got his pro card, of course, right away. Then he's like, oh, I need a few years. And we didn't see him or hear from him. And then he came back last year and he lost to
Brian got
DaCosta
him.
at the Monster Mash and didn't go to Worlds, which really is too bad because they wouldn't have been in the same weight class at Worlds. But the Monster Mash was split into two weight classes. So they ended up in the same. And so he, worked it out and gave a good run this year. He was fantastic year.
Hmm.
yeah.
Hmm.
He is someone who I've loved following because he doesn't like he just kind of randomly just posts when he wants to, and
Yeah.
then legitimately like disappeared off social media for about a year.
Yeah.
Everyone kind of forgot about him, and then he came back this
Yeah.
year, and all of, like the young guys are like, "Wait, who's this guy?" And I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah,
Who
like
is this guy?
freaks like that exist. You're like, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. He's a
uh,
he's a hard worker. He definitely trains very, very hard.
And genetics
Yep.
from the gods.
Ugh,
one of the
crazy.
densest human beings there is.
He's
Crazy,
incredible.
crazy.
He's
Yeah.
incredible.
Yeah. I hope he wins at some point. I think he will. He's just got to be persistent.
Hmm. Hmm. Keep plucking away.
Yep.
Yeah. All
Beautiful.
right. Well, we've
Let's.
been at this for quite some time. Yeah, I think that Leroy, that's what you're about to say.
Yeah.
Nancy, do you have any parting shots, right? Things you want to leave the audience with, words of wisdom from your years within the industry. What do you have for
um,
us?
Probably the best words of wisdom I can give are if it's something that you've thought about wanting to do, like, oh, maybe I'd like that, you have to do it at least once. You got to try. And the second thing is that wherever you compete, make a friend because a lot of the friends that you meet from the sport are going to be friends for life and you will be closer to them than many people already in your life. Just be friendly backstage and try to meet people because some of the best friends I have are people that I've met through the sport at different times. So I like to say that to people because a lot of people, their big thing is, oh, I want to win, I want to win, I want to do this. And really at the end of it, what do you remember most are the friendships and the moments that you had
Yeah.
with the friends more than, the wins or those things are more important. So,
Beautiful. Beautiful. Well, thank
yep.
you,
Absolutely.
Nancy. We appreciate
Thank
you coming
you.
on the podcast. It means a
Yep.
lot.
Yeah. Anytime. I like to talk.
We'll get you on again
All right.
without question. If you guys enjoyed
All
this
right.
episode, you know what to do. Like, subscribe, do all the good stuff, and we'll see you guys
Yep.
in the next one.
Thanks.